everyone, and welcome back to Short Circuits. Today we're going to be taking a look at this monstrosity. It is a Dell Optiplex GX110 Pentium 3 that I found at a local thrift shop. And I like to call these little guys mystery machines because you never know what's going to be inside them. I don't bother to open them when I find them. I just buy them for whatever price they are if they seem reasonable, and I bring them home and I crack them open and see what's inside. And in this case, we're looking at it's a Dell. And I usually don't buy Dells, and the reason why is because everything about a Dell is proprietary. The cases are proprietary, the motherboards, the fans, every piece of it usually can't be put into another machine. And apart from a couple of very minor upgrades, usually they're just as much as they were when they were pulled off the shelf, in 1997, 8, whenever they came out. But this one caught my eye, and for one very specific reason, we will be looking into that. But it's a Pentium 3. It was originally designed for Windows up to Windows 2000. As you can see, there was a Windows 2000 sticker on the side. Looks like they had probably Server Edition installed, something like that. And if we take a look here, on the front, we're looking at a couple of interesting devices here. We do have a 3.5-inch floppy drive, and as you can see, it is kind of proprietary to the case. The case itself is actually proprietary in the fact that if you pull the front cover off, the 3.5-inch floppy disk drive does not have a front plate. So if you were to try to put it into another machine, it would just be this naked piece of hardware, and you wouldn't be able to use it for anything. Below that, we have an extremely generic CD rewritable drive. No speeds listed, but it does still have an audio jack, even though it is lacking the play and pause buttons on classic drives. And then below that, surprise, surprise, I didn't notice this until I looked at it up close, there is a Zip 250 internal drive, which was really nice to see. I had actually been looking for a Zip 250 drive for quite some time because I had a couple of discs lying around that I did not know what was on them, but I apparently kept them for some reason. Taking a look at the back here, we do have a couple of extra expansion cards. We do have a sound card of some kind, a modem card, and then a video card. And as you can see on the left there, the motherboard already comes with a video card attached as well as an Ethernet port. So the purpose of the modem card and the video card are beyond me. But this little guy holds a few more surprises, especially for a Dell computer that we're going to take a look at here in a moment. Standing up a little bit, we do see that the back of the case does have a parallel port, two separate serial ports, two USB 1.0, and two PS2 ports for mouse and keyboard. It does look like it also has two internal fans that are slightly offset. However, that is a little bit misleading, as this case is self-contained to the point where the power supply is actually held behind the back plate. So that secondary fan that you see up high is actually the power supply fan. Now, in order to get into the case, it does take a little bit of work. Like with all things Dell, even opening the case isn't that easy. However, this one is slightly easier, as there is a nicely labeled button right in the front that says push here and lift. So if you give it a good push, the side of the case pops open, and then you have the option of just lifting the door up from that side. Now, once the door is open, you will find something rather shocking. Or perhaps not shocking considering it is a Dell computer. And even from this distance, the amount of dust inside is easily visible. The reason why I picked up this computer is, unlike most mystery machines that I do not open at the store, this one I did crack it open because it was a Dell. And when I saw how dirty it was inside, I had to bring it home and clean it. I just had to. It was a perfect opportunity to pull it apart, clean it out, and see what it had in store. And if you look, you can just see the dirt and the dust and the cobwebs like a blanket of snow on everything. I do not know where this computer was in its previous life, how long it had been running, where it had been sitting, but there is dirt and dust and webbing everywhere inside of it, and it was just so shocking and disgusting that I couldn't help but bring it home. I mean, just look at the size of those dust bunnies. You can't you can't get away from that. You can't even read what's on the hard drive. It's just so covered in gunk. So we're going to take a swing at cleaning this whole thing up and see where that lands us. So in order to start cleaning, we are going to need a few tools, including a screwdriver, a pair of pliers to handle most of the dust bunnies, some paper towels because I don't want to ruin a rag, and then some non-sponsored fantastic cleaner. I just grabbed whatever cleaner I could find that seemed to work. And then one trash bag to capture all the dust with. Now, in order to start cleaning, I figured the easiest thing to do was to take out the largest of the dust bunnies, of which there were two at the base. I used a pair of pliers for this. I don't know why. I'm not really a squeamish person when it comes to touching dust, but these things were so gigantic. I was afraid that there was going to be a spider living in one of them. They were disgusting. 90% of dust is um, dead human skin. So there's like a person and almost a half in just these two dust bunnies alone. And I have no idea how they formed in that particular area with them being stuck like they were with that, unless it was just the way the fans were. But I wanted to get rid of those first, and that was done. And so I was going to take a quick shot at starting to clean the expansion board that they have there. However, I found very quickly that one, my hand doesn't fit in there, and two, this was going to take a lot more work than just dusting off the parts. So I was going to have to take it all apart and do each piece one at a time, and then put it all back together again. So I kind of skipped forward towards that. Next, I had to figure out which parts to take out first. I had originally decided on the expansion slots, but it turns out that I couldn't figure out how to get the cards out. And I figured if you're going to take stuff out, you might as well start with the RAM. So this is a PC 128 megabytes. My camera wouldn't focus on any of part of it, but it's a basic generic 128 megabytes of RAM for Windows 98 2000 in that area. Next, I did try to go for the expansion slots. However, there was a security bar I could not figure out how to get around. Dusting it off did not reveal anything. However, I did notice this little green arrow pointing up, and it says release. And so I'm thinking to myself, this would be a perfect opportunity to push this, and it should have the cards slide out. But it turns out I was actually very, very wrong. This release button was for the power supply, which in fact tilts up at an angle and is held in by this large metal plate and allows you to access the motherboard. Although I found this to be an interesting design choice by Dell in order to allow access to the motherboard more easily so you wouldn't have to fight with the power supply, it wasn't very helpful on getting the expansion cards out. But while I had the system in place, I decided to use the time to clean the CPU fan shield. Notice how the fan shield itself actually blows all the incoming air from the back fan directly onto the CPU and doesn't allow for much cooling on the rest of the parts, which makes it almost completely useless as a case fan. Now, having noticed that green seemed to be the color indicating that something could be done, I noticed this little lever here down on the card slots, and when I pulled it, the entire thing slid out. This is an extremely useful design, and I really would like to see this in more modern cases, or at least not proprietary cases. But unfortunately, this is the only case I've ever seen this in, and I don't think we're going to see it very soon in the future either. Now with the expansion card deck out, I was able to gain access to the screws, which allowed me to unscrew the Sound Blaster Live card, which is one of the reasons I did grab this case. I actually have a Sound Blaster Live. I picked it up from shopgoodwill.com and when I really, really wanted one. And it was kind of nice to see one in this case, and it looked nice, clean, nothing was broken on the back. It looked fully functional. The downside is I believe I now own 3 of these cards, as well as an Audigy and an Audigy 2, while still missing the card that I'm looking for, which is the Sound Blaster 16-bit card for the original ISA slots. The next card to come out was the modem card. I didn't bother to look too closely at it as it was just a generic modem card. I did notice that it does have the Canadian flag printed on it. That seems to be a common thing with these older model modem cards that I'm finding. I'm pretty certain it's that it adheres to a Canadian standard. I also noticed that a couple of the capacitors near the base were bent in, and I think that these had been bent when they had inserted the Sound Blaster Live card. They had nicked it on the way down. Don't know if it damaged the modem card, but I really have no way of testing it, so there's not much really worried about there. Next item to come out was the mysterious VGA card. Taking a look at it, I did notice that it did say it was an NVIDIA card. What type is not printed on it anywhere that I could find, just a serial or a model number. I'm sure the FCC number would give me exactly the type, but I figured if there was an operating system on the hard drive, it would have the drivers installed, and that would be more than enough to let me know exactly what I was looking at. Next up, I decided to take out the hard drive because it was really interesting to me how much dust was caked on top of it. And I really just wanted an opportunity to to literally just clean it off, just to wipe it down. And as always, the green arrows point the right direction. This particular dry bay is rather interesting because once you unscrew it, once you're able to get that thing out of there, it doesn't just drop as I originally expected. And in fact, it swivels out. You actually pull it out and turn it, and then the hooks on the side hold it in place, and then you lift and pull it out. So it's rather interesting how that worked. Now, once the hard drive was out of the case, I did have to take it out of its enclosure, gave it a little dust off, and then I pulled the 4 screws. Once the screws were out, it slid out of its case rather easily. I have to admit I was a little disappointed in myself. I had originally intended not to disturb as much dust as possible, but you can see my fingerprints in it. Even without that, the amount of dust that was originally caked on it, I think had come off as soon as I tilted it up. It was on there pretty loosely, but there's still enough on there to where I could get the satisfaction of just wiping it down with one big sweep and see that nice Western Digital hard drive number right underneath. As you can see, it is a WD400, and it shows on there that it is a 40 gigabyte drive, which is not uncommon for Windows 98, 2000 and up PCs. Probably could even maybe fit Windows XP on there, although you probably couldn't fit much else. Continuing the tradition of green being something that you can use to unlock the case, I was able to use this switch to pull the front plate off, and it came off rather easily. Unfortunately, inside there were additional dust bunnies to be found, but I set that aside for later cleaning. And in order to get the disk drives out, I did have to remove the power cables and IDE cables from the back, and I immediately cut myself, so there's some blood for the blood gods. And once those are removed, the expansion drives came out rather easily. Starting with the zip drive at the bottom, it turns out it's a 3.5-inch drive with an expansion bay to 5.5-inch, and of course in one of the corners we find another rather large dust bunny hiding out. Pulling out the CD-ROM drive, we were able to notice there's a large collection of dust on top between it and the 3.5-inch drive. I was also able to pull out the other end of the CD audio cable. Cleaning it off, it turns out that it's just an LG model drive. There's no additional information on the back regarding any of its speeds or capabilities, but it does look like it came out in January of 2001, so it's a very early, slow, rewritable drive, it looks like. Now with all the drives loose, I decided to clean off the IDE cables themselves, so pulling them out of the case, I was able to wipe them down rather easily, just using a little bit of cleaning fluid and a paper towel. With the IDE cables clean, I was able to turn my attention to the power supply. I knew I wasn't going to be able to clean the interior of the power supply as it was self-contained, and I had no urge to open up the case, so I just cleaned around the grills as best I could. I then took the opportunity to remove the power supply to get it completely out of the way so I could clean the cables as well. It was at this point I realized that the power supply was also proprietary to the case, as it used clips within the frame of the power supply itself to slide into this holding mechanism, and I found no external connector for this case or for this power supply, as if to suggest that you could add it or attach it to a completely different power supply. So it looks like if this power ever died, you wouldn't be able to replace it with a generic one and then slide it into the case like this. You would have to find an exact replacement in order to get it to work. With the PSU out, I then started to clean the exterior of it as best I could. While taking a look at it, I did notice that Dell did have its stamp on the back. It does look like Trend may have made this power supply. I know Trend Microsystems is a company, but I'm not certain if that's what this is referring to. So it looks like it's a generic or possibly a Trend power supply, which Dell has stamped its name on and then put this proprietary case around in order for it to fit within this enclosure. And here's something I've never seen before in any other case. This is a rubber cap for the end of the PSU connector. And this is probably the cleanest part of the entire machine, is this little power supply connector right here underneath this cap. It turns out there are actually 2 of these on this power supply, and I left them on not only because they were interesting to me, but because I figured if this thing ever collected that much dust again, at least these 2 portions of the case would still be clean. It was at this point I switched to an actual cleaning rag rather than my paper towel, as the PSU cables had destroyed my paper towel and it was leaving more dust behind than it was actually picking up. From this point onward, I just basically went through and cleaned every individual piece and part, pulling as much dust away from it as I possibly could, and just making sure each one was generally clean. That took quite some time. So from this point, I'm just going to show kind of a highlight reel of what took place during that, as I don't wish to narrate every little thing that I did, as it did take a good 20-30 minutes in order to complete that. So we'll just show all the most important parts of taking things apart, putting them back together, and then we'll see you on the other side when we take a look inside this thing. And with that, it's finished. So as you can see, everything is much cleaner now. All the colors are shining through, all the metal is polished. There are no cobwebs. There's still a little bit of dust here and there. You can't get it all clean, but compared to what it looked like before, it is so much better than it was. It still is a Dell PC, and most everything in it is still proprietary and can't be moved to another computer, but it still looks nice. Now it's time to put the lid on. And once the cover's back on and everything's in place, it's going to be time to perform the smoke test, which I hadn't performed up to this point, and then find out what's inside. So here we are, and we have a power cord here, and I don't have anything plugged into it just in case everything shorts out, but I'm going to go ahead and plug it in and find out what happens. So the power supply fan kicks on, which is nice, and then we go ahead and press the front button, and magic! Along with magic, a crap ton of dust. Unfortunately, since I couldn't clean out the power supply, there's a lot of dust in there. Now, once I was able to get the PC booted up, it did boot into Windows 2000. Unfortunately, because of my capture software, I wasn't able to capture any of the loading screens. There wasn't much on the PC that I could find. There's a personal ancestral file 5.2, which had some personal information in there, family history and things like that, which I will not be showing here because that's, of course, not for the internet to see. Along with that, there did appear to be some music, which is where the Sound Blaster comes into play. The only music I could find were several Bobby Darin songs. If you've never heard of Bobby Darin, you should absolutely look them up. You may be familiar with one of his songs, Somewhere Beyond the Sea, which was used for the Bioshock trailer and as a main theme song for that game. So you might be aware of him even if you've never actually heard of the man. Taking a look at the system here on DirectX Diagnostic, we see that it's got 256 megs of RAM, a Pentium 3 1.0 gigahertz processor, and it looks like the video card was in fact an NVIDIA TNT2 Model 64, and as you can see there in the parenthesis, it is a Dell specific model. So not only did the motherboard come with a VGA card or VGA chip on it, the system seems to have come with a second card, a TNT2 card specifically to run a second monitor or give a little bit more information because it does have 16 megabytes of RAM on there, which is kind of nice. I don't know if it'll be usable in any other system, but having a TNT2 wouldn't be so bad. I've got several other video cards, but you know, it's always good to have another one if you need to. I did a little bit of testing with the system a little bit just to kind of see what the graphics card could do because I always like to check out the DirectX bouncing boxes and things like that. At one point, I did in fact break my video card because it changed the resolution, or my video capture because it changed the resolution. Kind of shorted it out a little bit. It happens from time to time, but I was able to recover it. And with that, that's it for this, our first mystery PC. After that, I didn't have much else to do with this. I may install something on it. I may scavenge it for a couple of parts. I have no idea. I may just redonate it for somebody else to find. But for now, as always, I would like to thank you all very much for joining me, 4 Kilobytes Short, on this episode of Short Circuits. And I will see you next video.